Today, students in Seattle will miss a fourth day of school as Seattle public school teachers continue their strike, which started on September 7th. The teachers are demanding higher pay, higher teacher-to-student ratios, particularly in special needs and multilingual rooms, as well as laptops for teaching assistants.
The Seattle Education Association, or the SEA, which is the group on strike, writes on its website that 93% of its members are working more than assigned or contract hours. The group also argues that teachers' pay is not keeping up with the skyrocketing cost of living in Seattle. According to data from the Center Square, some 40% of Seattle public school full-time teachers do make more than $100,000 per year. Associate editor at Reason Magazine, Liz Wolfe, joins us now to weigh in. So thank you so much for joining us, Liz. I feel very mind divided about this story because on the one hand, you have these sort of desk unions representing people who make, over $100,000 a year, which puts you in the top 10% very solidly. On the other hand, we don't want to say that any group of people should be beyond advocating for a living wage. And when you think about for example, let's just take housing in Seattle, to afford comfortably a 2-bedroom apartment in Seattle, you have to make $123,000 a year. So on the one hand, I feel that these are not the people that we typically think of as requiring, the kind of support that a union would give you. On the other hand, they are extremely important workers. Who is more important than the people educating our children? And the cost of living has actually skyrocketed in Seattle. What say you?
Well, I see an enormous difference between public sector unions and private sector unions. I am very sympathetic to the idea, and I think you can make a defensible libertarian case that collective bargaining, when done by private actors, is a perfectly appropriate sort of First Amendment expression. But I think that doesn't quite extend to public sector employees as well. I look at cop unions and I look at the degree to which they so frequently protect bad actors from getting fired. I look at teachers unions as yet another institution that very much enables all kinds of terrible behavior. I really do consider the degree to which COVID policy would have gone so differently had we not had incredibly powerful teachers unions in this country that really lobbied to keep schools closed far beyond what a lot of the medical community was saying was necessary, and in a way that was really out of step with the examples of many school districts in Europe. So I'm sympathetic to the idea that some of these teachers' complaints are valid, but I think we really need to go back to a first principles level and say, what exactly are these public sector unions protecting? Oftentimes some really, really bad behavior.
My understanding from looking at teacher compensation packages, not specifically in Seattle, but just kind of around the country, it looks to me like teacher pay is, obviously it ranges vastly. It's certainly not, I don't think it's obscene by any stretch of the imagination. What public school teachers do get that is pretty good compared to other sectors. The benefits are very good, and often the hours are very good because they get off of summers, or sometimes it's not a full day, which is not to say they work very hard, etc. And they have a tremendous amount of job protection, which I think can be frustrating for overperforming teachers who are probably not compensated or distinguished enough, because really you get these automatic pay raises, or you get a pay raise, if you went and got a master's of education, even if that's not really making you necessarily a better teacher. So there's a lot of I think there can be a lot of frustrating incentives in the teaching profession that are not really addressed by the kinds of things that a union is going to advocate for, right? Because they're going to be advocating for better, minimum standards of pay, or even more credentialism. Like, what if you get even more if you go further into student loan debt to get a master's or whatever? Like those kinds of, they're not going to be advocating like, let's really recognize our exceptional teachers and figure out how to change the system so more teachers are mimicking their behavior. Like that's just not how it works.
Exactly. I think both you and I would be on board with a much more meritocratic system, because it's worth noting that there are exceptional teachers out there who are really overperforming, and there are a ton of teachers out there who are terribly underperforming. All I want, given how important this profession is for pay to be something that incentivizes better performance. And I think we're not in a situation where that is the case. And I think teachers' unions are a significant part of the puzzle as to why we've gotten so far away from that. I mean, even like FDR was opposed to public sector unions. You guys, this, like, years and years ago, decades ago, there were tons of progressives and liberals who were very much opposed to this, even if they're, staunch proponents for collective bargaining overall. But I think specifically with the Seattle Educators Association, the specific union and their demands, I mean, they're asking for better staffing ratios in certain classrooms. Okay. They're asking for cost of living increases, which, by the way, I'm pretty sure that Seattle Public Schools has offered to meet them halfway, and yet that's not good enough for them. They're asking for that. One of their big complaints has to do with pay, but it also has to do with the fact that teachers are frequently expected to work beyond their contracted hours. Guess what? In any other profession, there would be situations where you sometimes log a few more hours in that week because that is part of what you need to do to get all of your work done. And I understand that that's not how this works in this specific industry, but I think it's worth sort of noting that their expectations are so warped compared to how it works in so many private sectors. And I think it's a really bad issue that they have these sort of unrealistic expectations for what work is like.
Yeah, something I just want to throw into the mix is it's very interesting to me that so when Glenn Youngkin was running, he ran on a platform of part of which was increasing pay for teachers. We now saw Ron DeSantis approve a big increase for teachers in Florida. It is so interesting to me that these Republicans are saying, okay, well, we don't approve of probably unions, but instead what we're going to do is preempt them by making sure that teachers who are so important feel that they can afford the lives that they're living based on what they're making.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely one path out of this. I think in general, one thing that we could really do is just try to reduce the amount of influence that teachers' unions have. It's honestly astonishing to me that they still have as much public support as they do. And I think some of this has to do with like historic revisionism from the Biden administration. We saw the White House press secretary merely like 2 weeks ago saying that Democrats were really the ones working on school reopening in spite of Republicans, which if you look at any school closure tracker and you look at the degree to which it corresponds with, super blue districts versus super red districts, oh my God, you guys, it's delusional. Like that is a delusional, completely incorrect comment, absolutely worthy of fact checking. It's totally detached from reality. And look, I'm not a huge Ron DeSantis fan. I'm not really even a huge Glenn Youngkin fan, though I generally favor moves towards school choice. I'm not saying Republicans are, wonderful in this area always. And I think we actually see, we need more radical changes within school districts and in terms of allowing school choice to actually get the educational outcomes we deserve in this country. But I do think it's worth saying, teachers' unions and the degree to which they continuously allow for some really, really terrible policies, some terrible COVID policies, returns of mask mandates, stuff like that. They're pretty horrible institutions, and I think we're seeing some bad behavior on display in Seattle right now.
The request they have for teachers' aides to get laptops reminded me of, I had actually forgotten this because it's so ridiculous. You would think like I hallucinated it, but the Chicago teachers had, during the pandemic, there was a part at which they were refusing, the teachers union was refusing to do, in-person schooling, but they did have these students who needed to be somewhere, right, to mimic the daycare, childcare function. So they were hiring teachers' aides because those people are not unionized to just kind of sit in a classroom and the kids would show up to the classroom, but learn virtually from a teacher who didn't have to come in, which is so, I think everyone can recognize, completely absurd, even absurd from an epidemiological stand, they were going to be in the classroom with an adult, but that adult would not be the teacher because the teachers had enough political power to refuse to actually do that. So they're going to hire new employees to do that instead. I mean, that's the kind of, I think, ridiculously that you're getting at when we talk about some of these policies.
Well, and I don't want to cherry pick examples, but if you look at a lot of the protest tactics used to lobby for greater COVID-related closures, you saw teachers trotting out body bags and doing these die-in protests and writing their own gravestones to try to make the case that if they returned to the classrooms, they would necessarily contract COVID and die, and there would be like a crazy, crazy death toll. You saw them, I think in Arizona, unions were writing obituaries, like pre-written obituaries that teachers could fill out. Obviously, the point is to, like, of all protest tactics, is to be evocative, right? Like, they want to evoke those strong emotions. They want to make their case. But at the points that they were doing these things, this was really untethered from an actual realistic risk assessment of just how bad COVID is. And frankly, this is part of why teachers were bumped up in line to receive vaccinations. I wish we'd vaccinated in every single state from oldest to youngest, because that makes the most sense risk-wise. But in a lot of places, because of teachers' unions and because of teachers' demands that they have all these COVID precautions before returning to classrooms, we let them get vaccinated first. We let them jump in line ahead of other people, regardless of their age, because we basically said, you know what, you guys are really important to protect if we want to get kids back in classrooms. And then in many cases, teachers' unions still said, nope, we can't return back to classrooms. It's not safe enough yet. It put people in a really bad spot.
But to me, I guess the thing I'm struggling with is, like, I want all workers to have that kind of leverage. Like, in the case of teachers, the reason I think it bothers all three of us is because they took that leverage and weaponized it against children, right? So, and that is horrible. I mean, I totally agree with you guys. But at the same time, would any of these teachers be making $100,000 a year or more if they didn't have a union? I'm jealous of the kind of leverage they have. I'm jealous of the kind of power they have. I want every worker in America to have access to something like that. So I feel like I can't say I wish they didn't have it. I'm glad they have it because they're workers, and I want all workers who are doing important work in America to have that kind of leverage. So I feel like there's kind of almost a catch-22 here.
I mean, I think we probably have a fundamental disagreement in terms of, like, I want the market to be able to decide people's salaries and to see how valuable their work productivity, their output is. And I recognize that sounds really callous to a lot of people. But I see unions as things that sort of sometimes artificially boost those wages. Fundamentally, there are some teaching jobs that are extremely difficult where you do have to be highly educated for them. But also, there are lots of jobs where I'm not totally convinced that you have to be the brightest possible person in order to do those jobs well. And that's sort of like a cold, hard reality that we're not really comfortable sitting with. But I'm not convinced that being a third grade science teacher is the absolute hardest thing in the world that's deserving of $120,000 a year.
Well, and maybe if you're exceptional at it, and you're just and the students who come through your classroom end up having, statistically measurably better outcomes than people would, right, in a true market system. Parents who'd want your kid educated by, Mr. Jones or whoever it is, they might be able to fetch a higher set. They might get paid more. They might get distinguished more. Right, under our current system, they're only more likely to draw a larger salary automatically the longer they've been there, and then if they went and got a master's of education, which maybe they don't need a master's of education to be a more effective teacher. In fact, I tend to think it would make you less of an effective teacher. Probably classroom experience is what makes you a more effective teacher, not like learning arcane theories of education from like woke people on campuses who actually have no real world experience as it is. So, Liz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.